They don't tell you what the doors sound like when they close on you. Not a creak, which just a soft, pressurized thud, the kind that says, this was decided before you arrived. The kind that has no appeal process, no ombudsman, no form to fill in triplicate. You are simply on the wrong side of it, and the stone walls do not register your name. Carole Middleton had stood outside more doors than most people know exist in this country. Staff corridors dressed up with better carpet than her childhood home ever had. She knew how to smile at the threshold. She knew how to wait. The one that operates behind the one tourist's photograph doesn't care what you know. Like, it cares what you're making assessments they will never explain. Her daughter, basically, was going to marry a prince. I think, because I was the one managing her. Nothing like in this building happens officially when it matters. I was a color sergeant, 14 years in, assigned to the ceremonial detail that day because my commanding officer owed someone a favor, and I was the someone who paid for it. My job was simple. Stand at the East Gallery entrance, log arrivals, redirect anyone not on the cleared list. She wasn't on the cleared list. She arrived at 11:04. No car circling back. Just a woman standing in the cold with the particular stillness of someone who has been insulted before and learned not to flinch at it. I had 3 options. I had standing orders. I had a radio clipped to my left shoulder and a protocol manual I could have quoted from memory. People rarely do at guards, the way that costs something to do. And she said, very quietly, I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here because my daughter asked me to come. 14 years. I had turned away journalists, dignitaries, a sitting MP, a man who claimed to be the Duke of something or other's second cousin. I had never once deviated from the list. What happened in the next 4 seconds is the reason I'm writing this down. Not for the record. The record will say something different, which for the truth of it. The small, ungovernable truth that gets lost every time. History decides what a moment meant. The East Gallery entrance smells like cold marble and something older. Beeswax, maybe. Or the accumulated breath of 2 centuries of people waiting to be judged worthy. I've stood at this post 40-something times. I stopped counting somewhere around year 9 when I realized the counting wasn't making me feel. That morning, basically, the palace was running at what I'd call a controlled boil. The engagement had been announced 3 days prior. The press was outside the front gates doing what the press does, hovering, calling out names, photographing cars. And inside, the machinery of the institution had already begun its quiet, merciless work of deciding who belonged in the story and who was backdrop, and cross-referenced against the household secretary's morning brief and countersigned by someone. 2 ranks above me, whose name I won't write here. Carole Middleton wasn't on it, which I knew who she was. You'd have had to be living under a very specific slab of ceremonial, sandstone not to know by that point. Mother of the future Princess of Wales. For what it's worth, former air hostess. Party planning company. The papers had been doing what papers do with women like her, oscillating between admiration and something that wanted very badly to look like journalism, but was really just old money sneering with a byline. She arrived without announcement, which was the first thing. Most people who arrive at this entrance announce themselves, not verbally but bodily. They adjust their posture. They add inches. They perform their right to be here in the set of their shoulders before they've... It is a specific, learned behavior, and I have watched it so many times it reads like a flag. She didn't do that. She walked up the approach path the way you walk to collect something that is already yours, which is a different body language entirely. Arrogance leans forward. This was something quieter, a settled certainty, the kind that doesn't need the room to confirm it. I pretty much clocked the gray wool coat. Well cut, but not ostentatious, the kind of coat that says I considered this rather than I spent. Her shoes had a small mark on the left heel, a pale scuff she hadn't noticed or hadn't had time to fix. And I cataloged it the way I catalog everything. Because cataloging is what keeps the hands still and the face neutral and the brain from making decisions it isn't supposed to make. Color sergeant. She addressed me by rank and not excuse me. Not hello, not the vague, destination-directed gaze most visitors use to look through you. She addressed me by rank, which meant she'd done her homework, which meant she wasn't here by accident. Ma'am. I actually kept my eyes forward, clipboard level. The list held at an angle she could not read. Name? Carole Middleton. I ran the list. The way for what it's worth. You run it when you already know the answer, but the protocol requires the performance of checking. I'm not seeing you on the cleared visitor register for this morning. Ma'am. Nothing in her face shifted. That was the second thing. Most people, when you tell them they're not on the list, produce one of three responses: outrage, embarrassment, or the particular social collapse of someone who has never been denied anything and doesn't have the vocabulary for it. She produced none of them. She stood very still with her hands clasped in front of her coat, not white-knuckled, not performatively calm, just still. And she said, "I'm aware." 2 words. Perfectly weighted. She wasn't arguing to be fair, the list. She sort of wasn't disputing my authority to enforce it. She, I think, was simply acknowledging the reality of her situation with a composure that, frankly, made me feel slightly shabby about the clipboard. I was asked to come, she continued, by my daughter. Not through the kind of household directly. She called me, in my opinion, at 8 this morning and asked me to be here at 11. I came. I had no protocol for this. Protocol assumed a certain type of person making a certain type of appeal, and none of the protocols had accounted for the specific quality of stillness she was standing in. I keyed my radio. Asked for a secondary check on the list, citing a possible administrative oversight. Buys time without admitting anything. The response came back in under a minute. No amendment to the list. Maintain current cleared roster. She could hear the radio. She didn't pretty much look at it, but the slight change in her breathing told me she'd registered the exchange. Not impatiently, without the performative patience of someone suppressing impatience, but the actual, earned kind that belongs to a woman who has spent her life being the person the room hasn't quite gotten around to yet. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I know what you're going to say." She said it without heat. Like without resignation either. I've been told kind of versions of it before. Different buildings, different uniforms, different lists. A breath. It's very effective system. I kept my posture. Kept the 14 years of practice. Institutional stillness that is supposed to make me impervious to exactly this kind of moment. There's a specific weight to watching someone absorb an indignity they've clearly absorbed many times before. Not because they're defeated by it, but because they've learned how to carry it without letting it change their face. That weight lands somewhere around the sternum and doesn't move quickly. She was looking at the doors, basically the tall ones, the ones that don't bang when they close. "She's going to be very good at this, you know," she said, and it took me a beat to understand she wasn't talking to me so much as depositing the sentence, somewhere it might be kept. "She's going to be extraordinary, and nobody in that building chose her. She just is." A bus passed somewhere beyond the gates. The wind off the mall caught the edge of her coat. I think I had the list. For what it's worth, I had my orders. I had 14 years of knowing exactly which side of every door I was supposed to stand on. "Ma'am," I said, and she turned. There are things you learn to identify in this job by sound alone. The specific timbre of a protest that's about to turn. The quality of silence in a corridor right before someone senior walks into it. The difference between a door opened by a person with authority. A door opened by a person performing authority. One has weight behind it, the other has theater. It doesn't announce itself. It is simply the absence of the hesitation that was there a second ago. A small interior click, like a mechanism engaging. And then you're already saying the thing. And the only question left is what happens after. "There's a side access point," I said. "Maintenance corridor off the north wing. It connects to the household staff passage on the 2nd floor. If you were to walk around the east perimeter path, the one the groundskeeping team uses, and if you happen to reach the gray door marked M7 at approximately 11:14, it would be unlocked. You know, routine maintenance window. No one, basically, would be redirected from it." I set it at normal volume, facing forward, eyes on the middle distance. She said nothing for 3 seconds. "And if someone were to walk through it?" "They'd need to. Know where they were going." Another pause. "2nd floor," she said quietly. "Plus, east-facing sitting room. Third door on the left after the staircase landing. She knew the building. Of course, in my opinion, she knew the building. She had been preparing to enter it, one way or another, for years. Maintenance window closes at 11:20, I said. She nodded once. Not gratefully, in my opinion. Gratitude would have made both of us uncomfortable. Just acknowledgement. The nod of someone who understands that a thing has happened and that its full implications will need to be sorted later. Then she adjusted the collar of her coat, turned, and walked back down the approach, path toward the perimeter, not hurrying, because she wasn't the kind of woman who ran. I turned back to the doors. Plus, my radio stayed clipped to my shoulder. My clipboard stayed level. My face stayed in its working position. Professional, absent, the expression of a man whose inner life is none of the palace's business. 40 for what it's worth. Seconds later, Corporal Vickers materialized at my left elbow. Been posted 30 meters back and had the particular quality of presence that means I saw that, and I'm deciding what it means. Ambitious in the careful, institutional way that meant he was monitoring everyone above him in the food chain for usable. I had been 24 once, and I remembered what that felt like from the inside. Everything all right? Color Sergeant? Redirected a visitor, I said. Not on the list. Noted. He wrote something. He was always writing something. I had never successfully determined what. The gray coat? Redirected, I said again. He looked at his clipboard, then at the perimeter path, where Carole Middleton was now a gray shape receding at the measured pace of a woman who goes exactly where she's decided to go. I'll log it as a soft redirect, he said carefully. Log it however you like, Corporal. He didn't ask anything further, which told me he was smarter than ambitious, which was a more interesting combination than I'd given him credit for. I thought about the maintenance log. The M7 corridor had genuinely been scheduled for an inspection that morning. Boiler pressure, routine, and I had genuinely known the window. That part wasn't fabricated. I hadn't manufactured an opportunity. I had simply noted an existing one and placed a person in proximity to it. There's a legal and moral distinction there that I have examined from several angles since, and the palace, ran on such distinctions. At 11:19, my radio crackled with a routine status check from the Northern Post. Noted nothing unusual. The morning continued its stately institutional progress. At 11:31, a different crackle. The household secretary's office, patching through to my radio directly, which happened perhaps 4 times a year. Color Sergeant Whitmore. Sir, there's a note here from the second-floor east sitting room. Mrs. Middleton, Catherine's mother, was observed entering via the household passage at... The princess, namely, in my opinion, requested her presence this morning. The household diary-like wasn't updated to reflect this. Administrative gap, apparently. A pause. Yes, sir? The note is satisfied. To confirm from your end that the morning was otherwise unremarkable. I looked at the mall, at the tourists, pressing against the outer gates, at the flag for what it's worth, above the building doing its slow sovereignty in the November wind. Unremarkable, sir. Kind of. Good man. The line went dead. I stayed with that for a while. 2 words doing the quiet, experienced work of a full sentence that nobody wanted written down. The I think household secretary wasn't a stupid man. He hadn't become the household secretary by failing to understand what had happened and choosing his language accordingly. He had, I think, simply offered me the agreed version of events, and I had confirmed it, and the palace had metabolized the morning and moved on, the way institutions metabolize inconvenient realities, not by denying them, but by reframing them until they're the shape the room requires. Carole Middleton had been inside for 15 minutes. I don't know what was said in that sitting room. I don't know whether she cried, or whether Catherine cried, or whether they sat with their hands around cups of tea doing the thing women sometimes do, which is to hold a silence together until it stops being painful and starts being companionship. I have no data on any of it. What I know is this: she came out at 12:44, same measured pace, the scuff still on the left heel. She walked past my post toward the main gate. She didn't look at me. At the edge of the path, she paused. Just for a moment. She adjusted something on her coat, the collar again, or perhaps a button. And then she was through the gate and the press was shouting her name and the photographers were firing, and she moved through all of it with her face composed and her chin level and her expression entirely her own. I watched until the crowd absorbed her. "Quiet morning," he said. I looked at the doors. Plus, quiet morning, I agreed. 6 weeks later, I was assigned to the pre-wedding coordination detail. Sort of, not a promotion exactly. A lateral absorption into a process that had been running since before the engagement was official. The kind of operation that the palace runs with the cheerful, merciless efficiency of a machine that has been refined by centuries of practice and never publicly acknowledged to exist. Every guest list cross-referenced, every seating chart war game for diplomatic consequence, and every procedural wrinkle ironed before anyone had the opportunity to notice it had ever been I had it to be fair, new assignment, liaise with the household secretary's office on ceremonial access logistics. I spent 3 weeks in a room on the second floor, third door on the left after the staircase landing. I don't know whether this was deliberate. I genuinely can't determine whether someone in the household placed me in that room as a small, or whether the room was simply available and I was simply the officer they assigned to it. And I am giving the machinery of this institution too much credit for subtlety. Both options seem equally plausible and neither would surprise me. What I know is that the room had a good window. I spent a great deal of time at that window while I should have been cross-referencing access, because there's something about the palace grounds from the inside. The specific quality of the light off the gravel, the way the gardens seem slightly more real than the world outside the gates, or perhaps slightly less real. I've never decided. That produces in me a reflective state I'm not normally prone to. I thought about the list. The list is, when you examine it carefully, a document of extraordinary presumption. It says these people belong in this story. It doesn't explain its reasoning. It doesn't appeal. It is simply authoritative. The way all instruments of institutional power are authoritative, not because they're correct, but because they've the stamina of consensus behind them. Enough people behaving as though the list is final makes the list final. That is not a complicated mechanism. It is just an old one. I had spent 14 years being one of those people. I do not particularly regret it, which I want to be precise about that. I am not writing some account of awakened conscience, some memoir of the guard who saw the light. Honestly, I followed protocol. On the specific morning in question, I made a judgment call within the existing physical reality of the maintenance schedule, and I placed it in the hands of a woman who knew exactly what to do with it. And the institution absorbed the result and renamed it an administrative gap, and we all move forward. To be fair, but there's a version of that morning in which I don't speak, in which I hold the clipboard level and I radio for the secondary check and I say I'm afraid. "You're not on the list, ma'am." And she nods, that controlled nod, and she turns and walks back down the path. And the door closes and nothing. A taxi, and the press at the gate shouting her name. The scuffed heel no one sees again. That version also follows protocol perfectly. It can't be faulted, which it is, on every official metric the correct version. It is the version that would have happened if I had been slightly more certain of my place in the system, or slightly less attentive to the sound of a woman depositing a sentence. She's going. To be extraordinary, and nobody chose her. She just is. Into the cold air of the approach path as though she was leaving something behind. For someone to find later. I don't know what that says about me. I have thought about it with the kind of circular, unresolved attention I normally reserve for tactical problems, and I have reached no clean conclusion. And I have come to believe that the absence of a clean conclusion is itself the point. The question is not whether I was right. The question is what it means that the question has to be asked at all. That a woman's right to be in the room where her daughter needed her should arrive as a problem requiring a solution. Should need someone with a clipboard to make a small, undocumented choice before she could take the third door on the left. The institution doesn't ask that question. Plus, it doesn't need to. It has the list. I was moved, I guess, off the detail in February, a month before the wedding. Reassigned to ceremonial duties at the Horse Guards. Nothing to read into it. Plus, on the morning of the wedding, I was positioned along the processional route, third post. I had a good sightline to the carriages. I didn't have, in my opinion, a radio, and ceremonial posts don't. Just the honestly uniform, the position, the training, and the long-practiced skill of standing still while history makes its photographs around you. I mean, the carriages passed were the kind of loud that stops being noise and starts being weather. Something you stand inside. Confetti coming off the mall like the city was molting. I kept my eyes forward, posture correct, gloves fitted, chin level. The second carriage was close when I saw her. Or thought I did, I can't be certain. The crowd was pressing hard, and my sight line was angled, and she wasn't in the carriage, but on the far pavement, standing in the press of bodies just beyond the barrier. A gray wool coat in a sea of Union Jacks, a composure that the occasion hadn't disrupted, watching. She pretty much might have looked at my post for half a second. She might not have, and there's no way to verify this from where I was standing, and I didn't write it down as fact. What I'd write, and am writing here, for whatever it is worth, is that in the 6 months between. That cold November for what it's worth, morning and that gold-lit April afternoon, something had changed in the way I read the list when it appeared on my clipboard each day. Sort of, the nature of it. What it claims to know, and what it doesn't. Vickers made lieutenant the following autumn. I had been offered the same. Trajectory twice and declined it twice, for reasons I explained as family logistics and have never fully re-examined. The gray door marked M7 was repainted that spring. Maintenance cycle. No notation in the access logs that it had ever served any purpose beyond what? Somewhere in, to be fair, the household archive. There's a note from the second-floor east sitting room, dated the 14th of November, recording an unscheduled visit, attributed to an administrative gap in the diary. That's what the record says. The record is not wrong. It is simply, like all records, like all lists, like all the soft thudding doors of this particular building, not quite the whole thing.